Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Hi there. Today is Mother's Day in the UK, and I would just like to acknowledge that for estranged moms out there. I know today is a hard day. If you're in the UK, it's Mother's Day, and you're not hearing from your adult child. And I just want you to know that I'm holding you in my heart on this day, and also know that this day will pass. And this is not a reflection of your worth as a human being, right? Allow your feelings to come up and out, and know that tomorrow a new day will begin. You'll get through this. Okay, I am T-minus 2 weeks and some days out from my move across country, and I am steep in the emotions of what this move means, both literally and metaphorically. And so look for some episodes to come once I get settled about this move, because I do think that a lot of it applies to estrangement as well. So interested in that. In 2 weeks from today, so starting on March 24th through April 14th, there will be a 4-part interview with an estranged adult daughter that I highly encourage estranged parents to listen to. This is a daughter that I've been in contact with basically for about 2 years now, maybe a little over 2 years. And she's in her mid-40s, a mother of 4 children, and went no contact with her mom about 2 years ago. And since then, she's been deep in the weeds of doing her inner work, peeling back the layers on how she came to be who she is today, and to understand the unhealthy relationship dynamics and patterns she and her mom have always shared. And in her interview, she discusses her pains, her questions, and what healing her relationship with her mom might look like. I encourage you to listen to her and her big brave, because she shares her story with vulnerability, honesty, care, and compassion. So I will leave that for you, and we will move forward with today's episode. Oh, before one more thing, a couple of quotes. How you feel is correct every single time, because it's a communication from you to you about you. That is by Arian Samui. And the second is, our actions always stem from something deep within. The roots of actions and behaviors are much deeper than what appears on the surface. Estrangement is a perfect example of this. It can be a form of running or hiding, and most often is a form of coping, and in some cases survival. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt or that it should not have been done. It means there's more to it. Not digging deeper will cause you to tie it, the estrangement, to your self-worth. And that is a quote by me. On to today's episode. Today's episode came about by a personal experience I had pretty recent. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a prime example of what our adult children are going through, because this experience I had was me being that adult child. And again, for reference, I am about 3 weeks out from my 55th birthday. So here I am, 54 years of age, and I find myself in this highly triggering event, experience. And so I wanted to share this with you. It was something that happened between my mom and myself, and I'm not here to throw my mom under the bus, because I actually know now that this was also a trigger for her. So I thought it would be a wonderful thing to discuss on the podcast as a real life example when of what our children are talking about when they talk about, you are triggering for me, you are emotionally triggering for me, um, and things like that. Emotional triggers are a very real thing. Okay, so before we get started, let's just define that, right? So emotional triggers are like specific stimuli, situations, events, um, that evoke within us intense emotional reactions versus responses. And these reactions are oftentimes disproportionate. That's kind of a key word here, to the current circumstances, where for other people where it's not an emotional trigger, they would be like, what is the big deal here, right? And they may be linked, and are oftentimes linked, in my opinion, to past experiences, traumas, and unresolved emotions. They can lead to that, like I said, the heightened emotional state, such as anger, sadness, anxiety, or fear. Oftentimes we see it as anger that comes up. And understanding emotional triggers is crucial for personal development and emotional well being. Um, when we can identify and address the triggers, we can then begin working towards breaking the automatic link between the stimuli and the emotional reaction. And how do we do that? We do that through self reflection, oftentimes for many people, therapy, and developing coping strategies to manage the emotional reactions more effectively. And ultimately, managing our emotional triggers contributes to healthier relationships and a greater sense and feeling of emotional resilience. So, back to this story with my mom. So, we're in this, I'm in this move, going to Florida to be with my parents, who are aging, and I will be living within their neighborhood. Not with them, but within their neighborhood. And my mom was talking about, when I get down there and begin walking my Greyhound Hollis through the neighborhood, uh, she indicated that, people will stop and ask me about him and want to have conversations about him, and in general just be, they're naturally curious and inquisitive about him and the greyhound breed, those types of things. And she said to me, just remember to be nice to them. Now I know, you know when I share this story, have shared this story over the last few weeks with some clients, most of them kind of chuckle at that. They're like, oh my gosh, you're 54 years old and your mom's telling you to be nice to people, right? And I understand that. When she said that to me, immediately I went from 0 to 100 in half a nanosecond, and was furious with her that here I am in my mid 50s, and you are telling me what, number one, you're telling me what to do, and number two, you have no clue who I am. Luckily for me, I was able to recognize right after, like within a second or two, after that initial anger came up and overtook me, what was happening. I recognized it. And so I was able to do that before I had a response or a reaction to my mom, right? I had the physical reaction, but I had not yet said anything to my mom. So what I said to her was, Mom, I'm always happy to talk about Hollis to anyone who wants to inquire about him. And then after I got off the phone with her, I really processed that. I went with to my therapist and I processed that with my therapist. And what I discovered was that trigger took me right back to about the age of 9, 10, maybe 11 years old, when my mom used to tell me all the time to be nice to people. Because remember, those of you who've been listening to the podcast for any length of time know that my story is that my mother and others used to always describe me as being an angry child. And so, by definition of that, to my mom, being an angry child meant I was not being nice. And so here she is, right? I have zero belief that she had any conscious awareness around this, that it was just simply habitual within the dynamic of our relationship between one another. Okay? Simply habitual. She had no conscious awareness around what she had done, what she had said, why she had said it, etc. So if she has no conscious awareness around this, right? And if I had said, if my reaction had been, oh my God, you never listen to me. You're always telling me what to do. Jesus, God, why do you do this to me? What that would have done for her would have put her on the defensive. And she would have probably at that point never had any interest in discovering what was actually going on beneath the surface, because she had been yelled at and screamed at and all of those things. So what I wanted to do instead was to have a response versus a reaction, and I did that with her. And then I wanted to find out, was this a trigger for her? Because I think it was, right? So here she is thinking, oh my gosh, this child of mine who has always been angry and not so nice to people, shutting people out, not willing to engage in conversations and have dialogue and laugh and have fun and enjoy people and life. And she's going to be around my people. And oh my gosh, what are these people going to think about me when my daughter shows up and now she's this angry person, right? Who isn't going to give them the time of day and is going to be rude and brush them off and things like that. And I was just astounded in that moment. I was like, oh my gosh, that was actually a trigger for my mom. And her reaction was to tell me to be nice, right? She had zero awareness and still doesn't today. I'm hoping to have that conversation with her at some point when I get moved down there, but she doesn't have an awareness around that. That for her, it was traumatizing for her as a parent of a child who was angry and she didn't know what to do with her. And she didn't, my mom didn't know about therapy. I mean, she knew about therapy, but it wasn't a thing that she went to. It was a thing that she sent her kids to on occasion, but it wasn't anything that she, took to heart and really did that inner work on herself. So she has no idea. And so here we are, both of us acting out our own triggers. And how much better it was for me to be able to respond versus react. Okay? I mean, oh my gosh, so much healing I have done to, if not change, I can't change my mom, but I can stop this cycle of continuing to damage the relationship with my mother. And that has been huge, right? And I recognize seeing this stuff within ourselves is really difficult to do without, for most human beings. Most human beings require some sort of support and, i.e., therapy, to be able to really peel these layers back and understand what's at the root of things. So let's break down what or how triggers show up in our lives. I think it's important to understand that they come about in a variety of ways, not just what I have just explained in my particular story or instance. But they can show up, as past associations. Again, this is kind of what I just explained on my end and how I was triggered. Uh, Emotional triggers often are rooted in past experiences, and are especially emotionally charged or traumatic. And again, my reaction was very emotionally charged. I felt it in my body, but I did not respond that way to my mother, as a response. So an example of a past association, another example would be someone who's um, involved in a car accident might experience, and this actually happens quite often, after the accident might experience intense anxiety or fear whenever they hear screeching tires, horns honking, um, even if they're not in any sort of immediate danger. A, an example of this is, the person that sits in the front passenger seat and is braking the car, kind of thing. Oftentimes, if you talk to that person, they've been in a previous car accident where either brakes failed or weren't applied quick enough, type thing, and there was an accident as a result. Another way they show up are from unresolved emotions. They're connected and to unresolved emotions or unprocessed emotions and trauma. And when individuals encounter situations reminiscent of the past pain or that distress, these unresolved emotions associated with it resurface. So an example of that is a person who experienced childhood abandonment may feel intense sadness and fear of rejection in adulthood when someone cancels plans, things like that, and it triggers that unresolved emotion from the past. And that actually, oh my goodness, is really common. Very, very, very common. Other ways are learned responses uh, that develop over time. Someone may learn a certain emotional reaction from significant people in their lives, i.e., parents for children, or peers, and shaping that their emotional response to a particular situation. Example of that is a child who grows up in a household where anger was expressed aggressively, and they may develop a trigger response of fear to and or anxiety to loud noises, loud voices, even if that anger is not directly directed at them, right? Another is conditioning. It can play a role in the formation of emotional triggers. Um, and an example of that is if someone consistently received praise and positive reinforcement when achieving high grades, they may develop a trigger to feel a strong sense of validation and happiness whenever they receive positive feedback about their intellectual abilities. So it could be a trigger, can be a positive thing kind of thing too, quote unquote positive. Another is survival mechanism, and where there is the strong emotional reaction served as a protective function in the past, helping a person to navigate threatening or challenging situations. And an example of that is someone who had a traumatic experience with a particular type of animal during childhood may experience a heightened fight or flight response when encountering that animal as an adult, even if they don't pose an actual threat to them. That is not uncommon either. Another is personal beliefs and values. The triggers can be linked to those deeply held beliefs and values. And an example of that is someone with a strong value for personal autonomy may experience anger or frustration when they perceive someone's attempting to control or restrict their choices. And that triggers a defensive emotional response. That's super common. And unconscious processes, uh, emotional triggers operate at the subconscious level for most people, right? Meaning they're not fully aware of it until after it happens. um, and increased self-awareness is essential for identifying and managing these emotional triggers. An example is a person who had a negative experience associated with a specific smell during childhood may react with discomfort or unease when encountering that smell again as an adult, or in other places, even though they're not consciously aware of that connection. And finally, interpersonal dynamics, relationships, especially those with significant emotional connections, can be fertile ground for triggers. And this is, i.e., the parent and a child relationship connection. But as an example here, too, is a romantic relationship. If the person has a history of being betrayed, they may experience intense jealousy or insecurity when their partner interacts with others, even innocently, due to the past relational dynamics influencing the emotional triggers. Okay, so we've learned about emotional triggers, and you're like, okay, Creed, that's fantastic, but what do we do about it, right? Um, First, we have to have an awareness. Without awareness, we can't do anything other than what we've been doing. Um, so we have to have an awareness. From there, we get curious. And from there, I think it's beneficial to seek out support, i.e., therapy. And I would also add in here, I think that somatic work could be super helpful with this as well. Our traumas and our triggers are not only stored in our memory, our subconscious, but also within our body. So, therapy with somatic work, I think, is an ideal pairing. We peel back the layers, begin to understand how our particular triggers came to be, and we learn different ways. And through that, there's a healing process, right? For most people, I think that when they begin to understand why things are happening the way that they are or have happened the way that they did, there's a level of healing that comes with that, right? Versus this unknown thing. And then we learn different ways to respond rather than react to those triggers. And again, that typically comes through therapy. Um, and then we practice the pause before we actually respond to someone. And then, once we've gone through this healing process, then we have an awareness around our actions. And then from there, when we have that, initial awareness, then we practice the pause before we respond. So that is a very brief um, take on what do we do with these triggers. I want to circle back around real quick to the story with my mom. These were both, she and I both were triggered. And these triggers are opportunities for learning and for growth, for change and for evolution, and helping us to repair our relationship dynamics with another person. If we go into it with a sense of curiosity to learn, why was my reaction so wild or loud or big when other people are like, what in the hell is your problem? Why are you, going well over the top with this? Anytime I see someone with a knee-jerk reaction to something that was said or done to them, or something that was not said or done to them, and they feel that they've been wronged by something someone didn't say, or something someone did not do, right? And there's a strong reaction from it. This that knee-jerk reaction. When that happens, I know that person's been being triggered, and our triggers are ours. They're not the other person. So my trigger with my mom and getting so angry about her telling me to be nice, that was my trigger. That was, what do I do with that? It wasn't a time for me to point the finger at her and to further damage the relationship by, throwing out accusations and causing, then she gets defensive, then her walls go up, and then we're just back in this vicious circle of triggering and highly damaging reactions that come from those triggers. So just tossing that out there, I think that is worth some exploration. And, explore these, maybe if exploring it with your, between the relationship with your adult child and or parent is too close, right? It hurts too much. Explore those triggers that you're having with other people in your life, that maybe it's not quite so intense, right? That's a place to begin, to start to understand yourself, right? I chose to provide myself with compassion that day. It was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that little 9-year-old, 10, 11-year-old little girl who was so hurt back in the day, she had no one there to help her process through those things. And so I'm here today, and I can tend to my little girl self and helping her to understand that my mother wasn't trying to be mean to me. She was reacting out of her own triggers. And so then I was able to have compassion for myself and compassion for my mom. So I hope that you have found something in here to be helpful to you. I encourage you and invite you to consider your triggers, consider looking at the triggers of your adult children, and maybe some of the things that they're feeling deep down inside about. Again, it's not what's on the surface, right? That big reaction is simply the symptom of what's beneath the surface. So I'll leave it here for today. If you're interested in coaching, these are some of the things that I go over in coaching with my clients. If you're interested in having support around that, please let me know. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you around that. I can be reached at TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com or via the website, TheEstrangedHeart.com. Until next time. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/The Estranged Mothers Support Group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at TheEstrangedHeart@gmail.com.